No one expects to disappear on a trail that schoolchildren hike every spring. Not when the routes are marked and the trees feel cataloged by memory. But in southern Vermont, in a patch of forest still held carefully out of place by locals and time, 5 people stepped forward on the long trail and were never truly seen again. No bodies, no footprints, just a honeycomb of stories, wrapped in silence, folded like a map that doesn't want to unfold all the way. And somewhere inside it all, the trail still waits. Glastenbury Mountain rises quietly from the spine of south-central Vermont, not far from Bennington. At 3,748 feet, it's not particularly tall, not threatening in the usual way. There are no sheer cliffs, no unstable snowpacks, no canyons carved into shale. Yet it casts one of the longest shadows in the history of American trail mysteries. From 1945 to 1950, an area surrounding this mountain, which locals began calling the Bennington Triangle, witnessed the disappearance of 5 people, all under unusually similar circumstances, all along or near the long trail, all with final steps observed, and all with nothing, not even a shoelace, found after. Mitty Rivers, Paula Welden, James Tedford, Paul Jepson, Frida Langer. 5 names, 5 files and weathered corners of state archives. Each case started with standard explanations: poor equipment, weather, age, inexperience. But as the years passed, searchers began to notice strange patterns: no footprints, no predator activity, dogs that refused to track, trails repeating their shapes, and always, the silence. The oldest of the cases is also the most practiced in local retelling. Mitty Rivers, 74 years old. November 1945. A seasoned hunting guide. Knew the Glastenbury ridgelines the way most people know hallways in their homes. He was leading a small group back toward camp after an afternoon scout. The group reported him just ahead, within sight. They watched him round a curve in the woods and step behind a boulder. When they got there, he was gone. No sounds, no signs of distress, not even disturbed leaves on the other side of the rock. 300 searchers combed the area. State troopers, Forest Service teams, family members. Nothing. Bloodhounds followed his scent for a few hundred yards, and then stopped. Not confused, not pulled away. They lay down, whined, refused to advance. One used cartridge from Mitty's hunting rifle was found, sitting quietly on a flat stone. Not near any trail, not spent, not dropped in motion, just placed. After that, nothing. Then there was Paula Jean Welden, second-year Bennington College student, 18 years old. December 1st, 1946. She told her roommate she needed to take a walk, clear her head, put on a red coat that she'd worn many times before. Nothing unusual. She was last seen walking north on the long trail outside Woodford Hollow. A couple hiking minutes behind her remembered seeing her red parka disappear around a bend. They assumed they would catch up to her again. They never did. Her case was the first to make national headlines. Reporters flooded the campus. Dozens of theories bloomed. Some said she'd eloped, staged her own disappearance. Others suggested abduction. A few pointed at one of the professors. But a quiet complication began spreading among the searchers. The trail kept changing. Flags left overnight were in different places by morning. Search dogs circled the same quarter-mile fork, but couldn't follow her scent past a specific pine cluster. And something else. Hikers felt watched. One air search reported a clearing that didn't exist on maps. They marked it by GPS, but when teams arrived, no such space could be found. The terrain didn't match. One ranger simply wrote, in his logbook, the line, "Patterns evident. Environment seems asymmetrical." Then James E. Tedford, 1949. A veteran, last seen alive on a bus. He boarded at St. Albans en route to the Bennington soldiers' home. Witnesses saw him asleep during the trip. The driver reported no stops. Yet when they reached Bennington, James was gone. His ticket stub was still on the seat. His suitcase overhead. No one had seen him move. Rumors said the bus passed through the edges of the triangle right at dusk. Other riders later admitted the air felt thick that day, compressed, like a train heading into a tight tunnel. But no one saw him exit. And the space he left behind? The seat felt warm. The next, Paul Jepson, 1950. 8 years old, wearing a bright red jacket. His mother left him briefly near their family's pig enclosure, just outside of Glastenbury, while she fed the animals. Less than 10 minutes. When she returned, Paul was gone. Tracks were found, barely, leading uphill. But at the edge of the woods, they vanished. Search dogs tracked scent for less than a mile before stopping cold. Again, Paul had recently drawn pictures, found under his bed. A man, always standing near trees. Tall, smiling, sometimes drawn with one giant hand and no footprints. When questioned, Paul's friend at school shared something no one expected. Paul said he'd been practicing disappearing. Then, finally, Frida Langer, October 1950. Experienced hiker, 53 years old, injured during a hike, but said she'd returned to camp to change clothing. She left no trace on the trail. But this time, things broke pattern. Her body was found. 7 months later, laid out in a clearing that search teams had already canvassed multiple times. Fully visible from above. No predator trauma. No decay consistent with the environment. The coroner couldn't assign a cause of death. The surrounding moss showed no indentation, as if her body had been laid in place after long preservation. Nearly a year had passed, and yet, no insect activity. Tracker Thomas Heller, who surveyed the site later, wrote in his report, "Location seems staged. Vegetation undisturbed. No trail in, no trail out." Frida, it seemed, had returned to the forest quietly, after being somewhere else. No one officially connected all 5 disappearances, but the shape remained. All vanished in daylight. All between 3 and 5 p.m. All within roughly 5-mile radii. 3 were wearing red. 4 were witnessed just before disappearance. And in all 5 cases, no prints. Just like the trail's surface folded, closed behind them. The Abenaki peoples who lived in the region centuries earlier had a phrase passed through oral tradition, recorded years later by ethnographers, the breath-stolen path. It was said to be a place not of violence, but of forgetting, of displacement, of recipes of symmetry too quiet to counter. An area with thin boundaries between visible forest and what lives just beneath the edge of sound. Modern skeptics blamed terrain, overstated patterns, local hysteria fed by lore. Geologists found low levels of magnetic variation. Radio operators noted reception dropouts in a cross-ring around Glastenbury's summit. Still, the stories continued. Quietly, and even into the 2000s, hikers report glitches. Voice recorders playing back strange echoes. Paths walked in one direction, never visible from the return. And more than anything, those who report the air stopping. Not windless. Not still. But how one hiker phrased it in an online journal entry. Like the forest was waiting until it could understand if I was meant to walk back, or keep feeding the spiral. They never posted again. And this is where Marla Jensen enters the story. An archivist. A rationalist. A woman who looked too deeply into the overlapping files and found something that wouldn't stay still on the page. She saw subtraction not as an unsolved equation, but as a pattern. And in autumn 2018, she went to Glastenbury. Not to make the pattern real, but to finish what others started before her. Her name was Marla Jensen. She wasn't a search and rescue volunteer, not a survivalist, not a paranormal blogger or thrill hunter with a GoPro and a lantern. She was, by trade, an archivist, a quiet pattern finder. She lived in Montpelier, kept to herself, had digitized over 15,000 pages of town records, ranger logs, and scanned diary entries from 1803 to the late 1960s. She preferred whispers and handwriting to anything shouted on a screen, and she only ever veered from neutrality twice in her career. Once, for a cataloging series on civilian conservation core file losses near old mining regions. And again, in 2017, when she encountered 5 redacted incident files from state archives, all tied to Glastenbury. They were all fragmented differently, pages torn, sections whited out, maps reproduced in mirror flip. One letter disappeared between a file scan and the original. But the names were those same 5 from every whispered article on the Bennington Triangle. Mitty, Paula, James, Paul, Frida, all logged as case complete, but either with no bodies or bodies found long after the window of normal explanation. Her curious mind should have moved on, but 2 details pulled her deeper. The first was a note, not even a full entry, a ranger memo from 1971, misfiled in a stack of resurfaced land management papers. Some trails are evening sensitive. The path that opens near the ridge bend is cleaner now. Not new. More like it's been waiting. The second was a child's drawing. Yellow paper. Tape-marked corners. Date, November 1950. Recovered from Paul Jepson's school portfolio by his mother. A row of trees. 2 tall oaks in the center. A thin rectangle between them, like a door frame. And next to the door, a barefoot figure with no face. At the bottom, written in pencil with help from a teacher. This is the friend only I can hear. He says I can live where time is not real. The ascending curve toward obsession began there. Marla requested further physical records. Found her requests silently closed. She reread the ranger logs from the 1970s and 80s. Not one referenced the disappearances directly, but there, hidden as weather notes or patrol anomalies, were embedded lines. Time jump again July 8th. Lost her for 43 minutes on Sector Loop. Dog stopped cold west of Cairn 4. Alert posture. No call. Weather still reads as past day. Compass reading spiral at 7:12 a.m. Spiral. That word appeared in 5 logs over 30 years. Never explained. Always coinciding with missing persons patrols. In early fall 2018, Marla filed for academic leave. No winded resignation post. No farewell tour. Just a borrowed research grant and a rental cabin booked for 21 days within walking range of Glastenbury's Long Trail section. An old hunting fire road sliced behind the second ridge, and if you stepped off trail about 200 yards, 1 foot into an older map version, you could make out the warped tree lines of what the early land surveyors had drawn as naturally misaligned corridors. She brought with her scanned ranger field logs from 1933 to 1974, a 1950s trail scanner oxide compass, salvaged, mid-century SAR unit forms with flagged annotations, 6 pages of personal notes from a missing ranger's journal recovered by his nephew, and 1 intentional test tool, a 300-foot spool of red cloth ribbon torn, faded, irregular. Already aged by the elements. She had no desire to be noticed. She also didn't believe the trail would do so right away. So she began documenting from the perimeter. She returned for 3 days with nothing but field recordings and measured sketches of ridge horizon gaps, solar position snapshots, and humidity patterns. Silent approaches. The trail, at first, offered nothing. No strange compass pulls. No missing markers. No sound compression. But on the morning of day 4, she opened her front step trail book to find a moss crescent pressed carefully between the pages. It hadn't been there the night before. The strange occurrences didn't hit loudly. That's not the way old trails work. It's not haunting. It's behavior. Day 6. Her field notes showed a compass spin she didn't remember experiencing. 74-degree deviation logged in smartwatch telemetry. But her hands had no memory of marking it. She used a Trail CAD overlay to align disappearance zones from historic files. They rotated, not randomly, around 1 single walking path. Not a circle. Not a loop. A spiral. Day 9. On her walk toward a lesser-used incline, a crow called once, and then everything stopped. No sound. No wind. Just a hollowed stillness. Like something had swallowed the forest's exhale and refused to give it back. Her compass seized. The needle pulled not toward magnetic north, but directly toward a cairn she had not placed. 7 stones. 1 on top tilted like it had been disturbed and politely reset. Next to it, a piece of red cloth. Threadbare. Tied in the exact knot she'd been using, only slightly sloppier. She didn't approach it. She waited 37 minutes. Sat still. Eyes open. Micro-recording disc running. Nothing happened. Then, the birds started again. Faint. The tiniest flutter of squirrels returned to the leaf beds. The trail had exhaled. As if testing. On the 12th day, something followed her home. She returned to the cabin. Nothing obviously disturbed. But on the doorknob, a trace of dark dirt too high and too narrow for a boot. Foot-shaped. With a missing heel drag. Half a barefoot impression. Inside, her journal lay open to an otherwise empty page. 5 words written in a hand that was not hers, but familiar. You keep walking spirals. No footprints inside. All windows locked. 1 pine needle balled and placed at the center of the stovetop. She stayed 5 more days. Not because she felt in control, but because she realized something. The pattern didn't emerge from mistakes. It emerged from observation. Her process had been noticed, mimicked, matched. She left on schedule. No car failures. No visual aberrations. No camera errors on the drive out. But the stories didn't stop there. Later that month, she analyzed her GPS path data across long trail sections. At first, they seemed ordinary, wandering arcs, curls around ridge elevation. But layered? Perfect spiral form. She cross-referenced a 1946 long trail survey done by a university geologist during a magnetic storm. Distances were slightly off. Not much, but just enough for the trail to have extra steps unaccounted for in both elevation and distance logs. She followed the math. If walked precisely, the route patterns formed a whirl, one that deepened every time someone returned. And the center? Fell just northeast of the last known sighting of Frida Langer. 1950, recovered body. No trauma, no explanation. She filed her report in a private digital journal, closed the page, packed away her archive. She never publicly posted a video, never released her footage. But she did write one thing, scrawled on the back of one of her own red flags and placed in her desk drawer. It wasn't a trail. It was a behavior that needed a memory to walk it. Now it has mine. She returned the way she came, but the path didn't let her leave clean. And something in the silence still traced her name. There's a certain quiet on the long trail that doesn't feel natural. Marla Jensen had walked large sections of the Vermont wilderness. She knew the difference between wind squeezing through the boughs and true absence. Between a shifting pine cone and a hush that suggested removal rather than stillness. But this was something else. And it began, as it always seems to, with sound. Day 14. By then, Marla wasn't exploring, as she first told herself. She was repeating, checking for anomalies, walking the same corridors with an archivist's discipline. Same boots, same pack weight, same time of day. She brought audio gear and a slow-tap visual logger synced to her watch at 15-second intervals. Some trails cleared up with repetition. This one grew more specific. She returned to a flat section that reminded her of the 1945 Midi River's disappearance. Just shy of a stone outcrop, roughly a quarter mile from where his final sighting was logged. On audio, a cricket chorus, low wind, her own boots thudding in real time. And then, without tapering, the trail went silent. Not softer, just gone. Not a leaf moved, not a crow barked. No body / no wind / no bugs. She stopped walking, raised her hand to test the air. Cold, but not unpleasant. She remained still for another full minute, then recorded the moment in her notebook. 2:14 p.m. Ripple of hush. Weak jaw pressure. Feels like something is listening inside my ears. She backed up 5 paces. Sound returned like she'd crossed a glass wall. Wind. Faint creak burble. She stepped forward again. Gone again. Instant, intrusive, complete. No fade up. No layering. Just missing. She tested the zone 3 times over the next 2 days. Let her audio recorder run from inside the silence, then played it after returning to the cabin. Each time, there was audio, but not hers. Instead, the recordings captured boot crunches offset by 7 seconds. Not quite duplicates. The crunch pattern was different than how she knew she had walked. Same weight, same boots, same gait almost. Listen closer, and you begin to notice someone walking just a few steps behind her ghost. And once, faintly, a breath at the end of the tape. Not heavy, not human, just a slowed inhale, looping for a half-second too long. She emailed the audio to her home server, ran it through a sound isolation process. The waveform confirmed something deeply wrong. The trail's location was duplicating her motion data, but slightly behind and slightly wrong. Organic mimicry recorded in real time. Breath pacing not human indexed. Still, she hiked. Documented. What she didn't expect was the voice. Day 17. A ridge trail so narrow that only one boot could touch down at a time. She walked it alone. Voice recorder paused. Backup GPS blinking for acquisition. Then, clear as if whispered 6 to 8 feet behind her left ear. Marla, said once. No breath. No echo. She froze. Didn't turn. Waited. And 15 seconds later, it repeated. Same voice. Same soft rhythm. Just a bit closer. Marla. She slowly raised her phone camera and turned 180 degrees mid-record. Nothing. Still trail. Still trees. Still that perfect absence of leaves beneath her boots. As if something sweeps ahead of her. When she reviewed the video later, the moment the voice should have occurred, white noise bloomed instead. And underneath? A second voice on reverse scan. Too low to register clearly, but similar. Flattened. Her own voice from the previous day's log, played back slightly wrong. That night, her dreams began rearranging themselves. She walked the trail in full color, hearing sounds she didn't recognize but instinctively believed. Not words, but data. Boot squelches, rock cracks, trees bending toward a center she never reached. Each time she tried to turn, the forest seemed to rotate gently with her, like a carousel playing no music. Then silence. Then 3 words, hear less, leave more. She woke, calm, but with one deep ache. A pull behind her sternum, like something had run a zeroed thread between her and the forest's core. Day 19. Late afternoon. She rewalked the loop from earlier, left a red marker tied loosely to a thorny low branch next to the cairn. Returned 90 minutes later. It was gone. In its place, a knot identical to her own, but in a different material. An old paracord scrap, faded red to pink, twisted in her knot signature, but reversed. Like someone had tied it while watching her hands move backward. Below it, on the base stone, 5 faint symbols. Spiral shapes. One looked like an ear. Another, a doorframe made of trees. The third dissolved as soon as she touched the bark. She filed audio evidence, took photos, but stopped thinking in terms of mistakes. This wasn't a trick of trees, or time impairment, or magnetic confusion. This was interaction, and not from something with eyes or limbs. From something mechanical but responsive, like trail logic given agency. So she changed her process. She stopped speaking on the trail entirely. If she heard movement, she didn't acknowledge it. If she heard her name, she walked quieter, not faster. Each repeating bend of trail, she passed with eyes open wide, but her hands relaxed, her footsteps even. If this thing studied rhythm, then she would alter hers just enough to confuse it. Then came the knock. Not in her cabin door. On the path. She was recording tree bark straying, watching cambium bloom under fixed strain. Snap. Knock. Knock knock. Then one more, longer, slower, like a palm pressed gently into dry wood. She waited in place for 22 minutes. No shape moved, no color blurred, just stillness, and a new flag on a branch she didn't place. Her own torn cloth, tied in her knot, facing inward. She tried to measure where the sound came from, pulled out her recorder backup. It was there, but when reversed, each knock repeated the same vibration pattern as her own heartbeat during the walk the day before. She stopped hiking the next morning, not out of fear, but because she realized something core. The trail wasn't trying to make her disappear. It was matching her steps, learning how she existed, cataloging the way her coat brushed pine, how she paused before inclines. It wasn't taking, it was building, and what it would do with that wasn't clear. She wrote a final voice note to herself that evening. I'm not walking it anymore, not now. I think it's figured me out. I think it has more than it needs. But if I leave too slowly, it'll tag what's left behind. That night, she heard her own voice say her name outside the window. Only once, then quiet, and the sound of a single barefoot step in gravel. What first twisted the sound now begins reshaping space itself. And soon, she won't trust even the dirt beneath her feet. Marla had 19 days of notes by the time she realized there were no right angles on the trail anymore. Where she once recorded northeast switchbacks, she now traced only bends, soft, slow-turning arcs that never seemed to resolve into a full loop or lead back the way they came. Whatever grid the long trail once followed, it was gone. Or maybe, she had stopped being shown it. Her maps didn't help, digitized or print. She traced her steps backward from audio logs and GPS pings, only to find inconsistent distances. A quarter mile that recorded the length of a full mile. Trail markers she'd flagged 2 days ago appeared again, slightly discolored and older, like someone had copied her flag, waited for weather to fade it, and rehung it in the same spot. Worse, organic duplicates. Cairns she had photographed were reappearing, stone by stone, same arrangement, but off placement. 4 feet to the west, then 7 feet upridge. At first, she thought it was memory corruption. Then it got worse. Day 20. She revisited what she called the through line, a soft incline just past a pine cluster where her internal compass always steered slightly wrong. The trail looked identical to 3 days earlier. Same moss rings, same windfall obstruction, Same tree with the blistered trunk. She passed that tree at 3:17 p.m., marked it again, chalk cross on a low knot. She walked 11 minutes forward, turned around to trace her path exactly back, and passed the same exact tree again. Same blister, same chalk, but she had used blue chalk. This mark was white, smeared, melting into bark. 12 feet later, she passed the tree she just chalked, this time marked in fresh blue. She passed her own path. She passed a close replica of it. Then again, she ran a new test the next morning. 17 trail flags. Soft cotton, non-reflective. Staggered north-south interval. She placed each at prescribed stops. Recited the time. Marked GPS, took high-res photos. Then backtracked. Flag was missing. Flag was marked with black scrape. Flag had been reversed. Tied in an opposite coil. Not mirrored. Only she hadn't walked that far yet. Something was jump patterning ahead of her. Studying shape recognition. She wasn't mapping the trail anymore. The trail was building a version of itself from her route data, copying what mattered, discarding the rest. Day 21. She woke with a dream still in her mouth. It wasn't frightening in the traditional sense. No pursuit, no falling, no lost limbs or hidden teeth, just a deep sense of loss of dimensional understanding. She walked out of a clearing, stepped between two trees, and found herself walking into the same clearing again, but angled differently. She turned, stepped once. The sun hadn't moved, but her shadow fell in the wrong direction. Her boot prints trailed behind, but also ahead. Two sets, matching stride, one real, one waiting for her to step into them. The next day, the cabin air was heavier, humid and dense, not from weather, from a static weight. Doors opened slower. Hinges creaked late, like wood lagging behind gravity. Even pouring coffee felt reversed, like the motion of pouring happened a second before liquid began falling. Marla stopped hiking that morning, sat on the porch, let the wind spin dry leaves in slow rotation. At 11:06 a.m., her GPS, turned off, turned itself on, pinged her location incorrectly, 700 feet beneath her current elevation. A slate ledge, a place she had never visited. Next to the pinged site, an alert pulsed once. You have returned, which shouldn't mean anything. It's not a command her GPS could render. She didn't touch it. Took a single photo. Her reflection in the screen showed something standing 2 feet behind her. No form, just a hint, a stretch of light. Between blinks, it was gone. The last trail segment she attempted, she left live audio recording pinned to her shoulder. Someone, something, whispered behind her between breaths. Mark, return, Mark, return. As if the trail had begun rehearsing her cycle aloud. She looped the section thrice. Always one new anomaly. First loop, a red ribbon she hadn't placed, folded and clean. Second loop, barefoot prints in dry granite, clean track. Facing away. Third, a cairn with a mirrored spiral placed so tightly she couldn't reverse it without collapsing the stones. And each time she walked back, a small vibration pulsated against her thigh, where her compass tapped her pack gently from inside. She pulled it out and realized the needle didn't spin anymore. It pointed toward the spiral, then the needle stilled. Not like it couldn't read, like it had finished. Backtrack was no longer safe. Returning required retracing every motion exactly, where she paused, where she drank water, where she said her name aloud. Even wrong breathing patterns triggered shifts. She believed one misstep would open new segments. Ones no human had walked yet. The next morning, she found the old compass. Not hers. 1950s make. Rusted. Initials etched faint. J.T. James Tedford. The bus passenger. Never found. Except, the compass faced backward when held in hand. The directional indicator curved underneath instead of above. It felt wrong in her palm. Heavy like a stone that remembered being held too many times. Marla didn't take it with her. She buried it in soft dirt beneath the cairn, marked it with 3 small stones. When she returned to the cabin, it was on her porch. Clean now, polished, no initials, and it only pointed at her. Her final day in Glastenbury was quiet. No voice, no knocks, no misaligned weather, just clarity. She looked at her map overlay of the past 22 days. Almost unbroken pattern. The shape? Spiral. Mapped perfectly against trees she hadn't known she'd passed twice. Each bend deepened, not just inward, but under. She lowered her head, closed her laptop, and whispered, "I've been copied." She didn't know how she knew it, but some version of her walk had been recreated, replayed, restaged, and something was watching what she couldn't correct. The last recording she sent to her office, via cloud link, undated. Softly spoken. "It doesn't want to trap me here. It just wants to understand my shape. Footstep by footstep. Day by day. Like a trail, learning how to walk." Then silence. Then, a second voice on the line. Repeating. Not step. Spiral. The trail had studied her pattern. Now, it began reshaping it, one wrong breath at a time. There is a rule whispered by old hunters in Bennington County, older than the term Bennington Triangle, older than the freeway signs that now cut through green mountain woods. If the trail starts walking like you, stop. What repeats wants permission. Marla Jensen didn't know that rule before she arrived, but now, she was beginning to feel it. Because the spiral hadn't just copied her path, it was now copying her body. Day 23. The cabin porch creaked while she sat still. Inside, her boots sat where she'd placed them, neatly upright, tied together. But when she stepped outside for air, she found a second pair of footprints in the drying mud of her walk path. Not her own. Longer-toed. Narrower. Flat. No arch. No heel stroke. No starting point. The prints began mid-trail. For steps. Then nothing. Facing her window. Unmoving. Watching. That night, her dream was late. She slept heavily, long after midnight, and dreamed of her own hand opening her own door, except it wasn't connected to her body. She stood inside, watching her own fingers reach for the knob. The movement was clean, slow, familiar, but not hers. When she woke, her field recorder had a single spike at 4:47 a.m. She checked the playback. Ambient silence. Cabin creaks. Then her own voice. "I've already left." Calm. Measured. But she'd said nothing. She contacted no one. Packed her gear mechanically. Didn't think about family. Or Montpelier. Or how long she had actually been out there. Time had become a fog. Not night/day, just wait. She made the decision to leave that morning. But the trail had already marked her. The next 2 hours unwound differently. Colors dimmed in patches. Not everywhere, just inside the bends. Leaves had no wind recoil. Tree branches pointed the wrong way. She tried to re-follow a safe route back, one already documented, but the path bent inward instead of turning out toward the hill. Worse, she noticed a new shape among her markers. A red ribbon she hadn't tied. Or not, but mirrored. Left over right instead of right over left. Placed on a route just ahead. Then 3 more. Each one less frayed than hers. Each one slightly cleaner. Not aged. Not weather-worn. New. Like they'd been placed after she'd already left them. Not echoes. Replacements. The spiral wasn't trying to trap. Trapping implies motive. This was something else. Substitution. Her compass would no longer leave a resting position. It didn't point to magnetic north. It didn't spin. It twitched. Like it was reluctant. Not broken, undecided. Matching a shape not based on resources, but on recognition. She stepped between 2 trees. Just ordinary sugar maples. No markings. No signage. And suddenly, the temperature dropped. Not a breeze. Just a distinct, still shift. And something inside that calm made her stop. At her feet, footprints. Bare. Again, without root disturbance. As if the foot had pressed from above, not walked in from the side. Facing the direction she was going. But already 20 steps ahead. She turned off her GPS useless. Stopped recording audio. It only played things she hadn't said. She moved slowly. And around the 3rd curve, she saw it. A figure. Her height. Her posture. Back turned. Not moving. Just duplicated stance. Clothed in grays and greens, like her. Arms at the same angle. Head tilt matched. And in one horrifying flash of instinct, she realized it was standing where she planned to stop. Not where she'd already been. There was no present on this trail anymore. Only pre-play or echo. And the trail had begun choosing which version of her it wanted to walk in ahead. She stepped back. Tripped slightly. Caught herself on a birch limb. Sharp. Dry. It scratched her wrist. Almost broke skin. She looked down. There was no blood. Just a fine dust. Moss-like. Pale, powdery green. And when she went to brush it off, it wasn't on her arm. It was coming out of the scratch. She returned to the cabin before sundown. Didn't unpack. Just closed the door. Stared at her journal. Its open page read a new line below her writing. Same pen, slightly thicker pressure. Not her handwriting. This is how the trail remembers. By making you remember less. Inside the walls, she heard the forest one last time. Just outside. The knock returned. But now it came from inside the closet. Just one. Then another. A long pause. Then two more. Same pattern as the last 4 days. But now enclosed. Like the spiral had stopped evolving geometry and started collapsing her physical dimensions down into something, music box small. Folded trail. Folded room. Folded self. She didn't sleep. And when dawn smeared across her cabin window, she finally opened the closet. Inside, nothing. Just one pine needle. And a ribbon. Folded in the perfect mirrored knot. Initialed, faintly, MJ. This was the last day she would spend on that land. She left the flags behind. Took only her red scarf, now washed of all scent. Dropped her boots at the ranger station without a word. Booked a 3-day train ride home. She never drove again. And, according to digital records, she never once stepped foot in a maintained forest after that. 6 months later, a trail runner spotted a woman who looked exactly like Marla hiking a ridge on the far end of Glastenbury. The problem? She moved slightly wrong. Not limping. Not off balance. Just responsive. Like she wasn't choosing each step. Like the trail itself was choosing how she walked. And when the runner called out, "Marla?" the woman turned her head just slightly, then walked forward again, leaving no prints. The trail had harvested her pattern. Now it began showing her the center. The spiral had learned enough. That much was clear. It no longer mimicked her movements a day later. It echoed her steps as she made them. Sometimes before, she'd stopped logging exact times because time, in the most humiliating sense, had stopped obeying her. The woods weren't overwhelming anymore. They weren't threatening. They were attentive, and that was worse. Marla's final hike began without intention. She just stepped outside, sometime before 9 a.m., and found herself on the trail again. No pack, no compass, no maps. Her body acted on borrowed memory, not instinct. She passed the double-trunk cedar, a tree she could have sworn didn't exist yesterday. The same cairn reappeared, though the 7th stone had changed. Instead of resting cleanly on top, it was embedded into the side, halfway inserted, like the trail hadn't finished building it before she arrived. Each step forward felt less like walking, more like replay. She started to wonder if the trail had ever watched anyone else for this long, or if that meant it had watched someone just like her before, looking for a missing person, marking their steps, trying to interpret the same strange folding. And maybe the trail didn't let that person go, not because they failed, but because it finally had what it needed. At 1:17 p.m., she stepped into the clearing, wider than it should have been, elliptical, surrounded by mismatched trees, cedar, pine, birch, black locust. The center held no cairn, no logger's post, no apparent focal point, except her field journal, lying flat on a large, glacial boulder, opened precisely to the page where she had written her first note 23 days before. The ink looked fresh. She hadn't brought the book with her that day. The moment she took a breath, she felt the air tension change. The wind wasn't blowing. It was circling, low, subtle, following the same direction she'd walked all month. Not just pacing her, drawing her spiral inward with soft shaping. Then came the movement, not from outside the clearing, from within it, just to the side of where she wasn't looking. That's how it moved. Not darting, not creeping, just repositioning itself outside her direct perception. At first, it was a flicker between trees, something overly straight against naturally rounded trunks. The illusion of a shoulder, or an elbow, or even a head tilted slightly out of parallel. Whatever it was, it didn't seem in a hurry, because it had already studied her. Thousands of steps, hours of trail logic, silence tests, movement rhythms. It had finished running her pattern, and now it was assigning her a shape to keep. Marla remembered her father's voice when she was a child, reading her field guides at bedtime. Wilderness doesn't confront you. It waits to see if you respect it. She lowered herself slightly to the earth. Didn't speak. Didn't run. Just opened her palm and placed it in the dirt beside her. Pressed hard. The soil shifted a little. Immediately beside her, a new depression appeared. 4 fingers. Then 5. Palm down, mirroring hers. No one beside her. No camera trick. Just synchronized pressure memory. And then, Footprints. Appearing without motion. Filling slowly into the loam not 10 feet ahead of her. As if something invisible was being given back to the earth it had watched rise from. She stood. Slowly. Didn't speak. Didn't point her recorder at it. That felt disrespectful. She stepped once into the center of the clearing. Back toward her journal. Inside was a note. Her handwriting. One sentence, but she had not written it. Priming complete. Returning your shape. Then an arrow. One line. Drawn in graphite. Pointing to the opposite way she came in. But the trail was gone. There was no exit behind her. Just perfect ring symmetry. And then, from what should have been directional silence, a noise emerged. A breath. Drawn in through trees. But not through lungs, through distance. Sound doubled, like it had been replayed into existence from memory instead of generated live. She turned again, and the spiral moved with her. Each tree, each bend, aligned to continue the path regardless of her intention. There was no wrong direction. There was only forward, deeper. Unless you walk your pattern backward. Precisely. She flipped back through the journal, turned to day 1. First step. North Fork 19 paces, pause by outcrop 6 paces with weight shift 1 line stood out. Note. Only reverse if geometry resets. She looked ahead, the trees mirrored. Geometry had reset. She exhaled once. Let her arms go limp. Then stepped left. Then back. Then right. Walked 9 steps, and past her own boot print. Fresh. On the trail she was now leaving. And in that moment, time returned. A bird called. A squirrel shifted bark at top ridge. Her ears popped, and the clearing broke. The entire tree ring folded out like it had finished scanning, releasing her from the symmetry. Not because she figured it out, but because she'd respected the dance. And that was part of the test all along. She emerged back near the first moss slope she'd documented on day 2. 5 yards from camp. No tunnel of fog. No jump scare. Just dry heat. And an ordinary pine stump she hadn't seen before. Atop the stump, her scarf. Washed. Folded. Planted with one vertical red tie across its center. Below it, on bark. Unburned. Gently edged. MJ shape stored approved query. Self / draft complete. She picked up the scarf and closed her eyes. Then took a step not forward, not backward, sideways. The spiral, she suspected, wouldn't follow that. Because it only had her pattern now. And sideways was something it hadn't learned yet. Not everyone who returns is whole. Some leave the trail. But the trail doesn't leave them. It just takes its piece and waits to use it again. Marla Jensen returned home different. No scars. No injury. No visible damage. But those who knew her noticed subtle changes. She didn't walk evenly anymore. Her right foot, once her dominant step, began hesitating. Just slightly. Measuring as if the ground needed permission. Like she was trying to place her foot in an outline that no longer matched. She told no one what happened. Not fully. Not her editor. Not her old university sponsor. Not friends. Not family. Only one person saw the full journal. And that person, a collaborator on wilderness folklore studies, placed it in a vault within a private archive in Montpelier. Labeled only, Field Study, Jensen /2018 pattern match spiral / do not replicate. No one's opened it since. No one's asked to. But the trail still leaves traces. A coworker once mentioned finding a pine needle on Marla's desk. Midwinter. Office sealed. She hadn't gone hiking in 2 months. Said she hadn't even unpacked from Vermont. When asked, she smiled and simply said, "I think part of the woods followed me back." Quietly, things changed in her apartment. At first, it was small. The stovetop began ticking at odd intervals. Only 3 knocks, spaced in patterns. The air in her hallway sometimes hung oddly still, as though some sound was being muffled within the apartment, not outside it. She once found her reflection blinking too late in her bathroom mirror. The landlord changed her locks twice, but sometimes she still returned home to find the closet door open. On the days that happened, a familiar item would inexplicably resurface: a scarf, a button, a page fragment from her field journal, one she had burned deliberately in October. All intact, all appearing dustless, all folded neatly, always accompanied by a smell, not strong, just the faint scent of decomposing moss and cold stone. She filed no police reports. She didn't bother. She knew. At some point during her 23 days out there in Glastenbury, the trail had not only studied her, it had stored her, filed her into its shape catalog, and now it only needed parts. Small ones, untrackable ones, a habit, a step, a blink, just enough to rebuild something. Maybe not a perfect version of her, but something close enough to walk it again. One night, just before New Year's, her phone buzzed. An alert. New device. MT Field Rec 01 attempted to sync with your cloud archive. Except she hadn't named any device that. Hadn't logged into the field system for weeks. She disabled the signal, changed her credentials, but an hour later, her laptop turned on, unprompted, then shut itself down. And when she went into her photos folder, 2 new files had been created, still frames that appeared black at first glance. But when brightened, a red flag, tied to a branch, just visible in the lower right. Same knot, same cloth, same signature. Her reversal flag. Marla stopped sleeping near windows. Stopped letting mirrors reflect more than her shoulders. She wore dull colors in public. Never read. And never, ever left her coat alone near the forested part of town. She once walked past a trail junction in Vermont 5 months later, nowhere near Glastenbury, and felt the same resistance in her compass. Only briefly, like a check-in, not a warning, just a pulse, saying, "You're known." Locals still talk about the long trail. Not in the brochures, or the hiking websites, or the curated Instagram reels, but in back rooms of ranger stations, old bait tackle shops, and corners of diners. There, the locals speak soft. You mark your steps. You count them, not to track where you are, but so the trail knows you want them back. One ranger swears he heard his daughter laughing in the woods, years after she passed, deep in the trees, late in the season. He ran out 30 yards, called her name once. No answer, just silence. Then 2 soft footsteps where no leaves crunched. When he returned, her scarf was sitting on the hood of his truck, folded once. The trail gets referred to by many names now. Footpath 42, the Taker's Measure, Ridgebend Spiral. But the oldest name resurfaced in the town records during a building preservation scan in 2019. Handwritten log, 1911. We are not to record the underpath during map survey. The land here doesn't take kindly to being charted plain. There's a shape under the ridge. One that walks you second, then waits to see what you'll leave behind. Avoid at all costs during solstice rides. No known follow-up to the entry. No author identified. But the handwriting matches an old forest abstractionist named Rowan James, a man widely believed to have walked the long trail and come back as something else. In late 2020, a drone footage channel picked up a heat signature while flying a survey pass along a lesser-used trail connector near Glastenbury. The camera didn't see it in video, but the thermal logs did. An upright form, moving across the trail with perfect human pacing. No break in stride, but no friction readings at the footfall level. No pressure displacement. No sound. The next day, the forest camera near that location triggered at 3:09 a.m. captured a frame of a figure. Shoulder-length hair. Hiking clothes. Looked like Marla Jensen, but when brightened, no facial features. Only a smooth oval where her face should have been, and a red fragment hanging loosely from one hand. So what's the truth? That 5 people vanished on a ridge. That a researcher walked herself out of recognition? That forests grow their own customs? The answer, if there is one, doesn't belong in trail manuals or podcasts or ghost compendiums. It belongs in quiet rules. Whispered. Inherited. Memorized. Locals still keep these 6. Don't speak your full name near Ridgebend. Don't leave anything red that isn't torn. If your path folds back without you turning, stop. If you hear a voice echo a sentence you just thought, do not reply. If your compass starts twitching, but holds its place, it has already recorded your center. And if you leave, take nothing soft with you. Not a scarf, not a gloved handprint, not your unfinished step. That's how it starts walking for you. No jump scares, no blood, just borrowed breath. Just a thought molded and walked back toward the earth. One spiral pattern at a time. One forgotten face at the edge of a trail that never really ends. If the trail walks you, walk quieter. Let it forget. Let it watch something else. And if you ever see someone who almost looks familiar,